Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we're going to take a deep dive into Antony Beevor's monumental work, The Second World War. Now, for you, our listener, this isn't just about, revisiting dates and battles. It's really about peeling back the layers, trying to understand the complex web of events, decisions, and the profound human experiences that led to the deadliest conflict in human history.
That's exactly right. And what Beevor does immediately is challenge any, simplistic view of World War II's origins. He presents it not as a single war starting neatly on September 1st, 1939, but more as an amalgamation of conflicts. Conflicts with roots stretching much, much further back. Some historians, for instance, they see it as a 30 years war beginning back in 1914, or even a long war starting with the Bolshevik coup in 1917.
Right.
And crucially, the book highlights the often overlooked Sino-Japanese War. That's seen as a vital early part of this global conflict. Beevor argues that the first real clash of World War II actually began in the Far East. A core theme woven throughout is the profound human cost, the helplessness of most ordinary mortals, as he puts it, in the face of what appeared to be overwhelming historical forces. And this is powerfully shown by the story of Yang Kyung-jong, which I think we should definitely get into.
Yeah, let's do that.
The book also deeply explores how things like political polarization, economic distress, and these intense ideological clashes, left versus right, nationalism versus communism, how they all fueled this devastating period. Beevor meticulously details how the pre-war era was just tragically characterized by widespread miscalculation, opportunism, and frankly a failure of diplomacy by various powers, which of course allowed aggressive regimes to gain immense strength.
Okay, let's unpack this then. And starting with that human story you mentioned, the tale of Yang Kyung-jong, is fascinating because, like you said, it doesn't start in Europe. You might expect us to jump straight into Germany or Poland, but Beevor takes us somewhere quite unexpected for the first clash of the war.
It's an incredible story, Yang Kyung-jong's journey, and it perfectly illustrates the global reach of this conflict right from the outset. So he was a Korean, forcibly conscripted by the Japanese into their Kwantung Army that was their main force in Manchuria back in 1938.
Okay.
Just a year later, 1939, he's captured by the Red Army. This is at the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol on the Mongolian border. It's a huge battle, actually, that often gets missed in Western histories. He gets sent to a Soviet labor camp. Then, in 1942, during a moment of crisis for the Soviets, he's drafted into their forces.
Wow.
Early 1943, he gets captured again, this time by the Germans at the Battle of Kharkov in Ukraine.
Unbelievable.
The Germans then send him to France to serve in an Ostbataillon. These were units of, non-Germans fighting for the Nazis, stationed at the Atlantic Wall. His journey finally ends in 1944. He surrenders to American paratroopers at Normandy, D-Day. He eventually settled in the U.S. and died in Illinois in 1992. What's so striking here, and why Beevor likely starts with it, is how his personal story immediately underlines the book's broader themes. The sheer global reach, the devastating impact on ordinary lives, and the way seemingly separate events, continents apart, were all interconnected. I mean, he literally fought for 3 different armies against 3 different enemies.
That's extraordinary. So what does this remarkable story tell us about understanding the war's origins? It really hammers home Beevor's point, doesn't it? It wasn't just one start date. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, yes, but the fuse was lit much, much earlier.
Exactly, and it raises that important question. Why is it so hard to pinpoint a single starting moment? It's because, as Beevor argues, the Second World War was truly this amalgamation of conflicts. You had intertwined national rivalries, yes, but also these international civil wars between ideologies left versus right. Some historians see it as a direct continuation of World War I, that 30 years war from 1914 to 1945. Others trace it back to the 1917 Bolshevik coup, seeing it as part of a broader European civil war.
Right.
For the left, particularly, the Spanish Civil War is often seen as a crucial starting point, while for Asian historians, it's the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931, which led to the full-scale Sino-Japanese War in 1937 that marks the true start of the global conflict. And Beevor really highlights how Western histories have often, overlooked the significance of this Asian front, focusing too narrowly on Europe.
Let's rewind a bit then to that crucial pre-war environment, especially in Germany, to really grasp how the stage was set for Hitler's rise and his later aggression. What were the key factors in Europe after World War I?
Well, the aftermath of World War I left a continent just shattered. France and Britain were utterly exhausted, determined never to repeat that experience. The United States largely pulled back, wanting to distance itself from what it saw as the corrupt and vicious old world.
Isolationism.
Precisely. Central Europe, though, was fragmented, humiliated, facing what Beevor calls the penury of defeat. And in Germany, the sense of defeat was amplified by the stab-in-the-back legend, this pernicious conspiracy theory blaming Jewish Bolsheviks for the loss.
Even though the reality was weariness and hunger.
Exactly. That, combined with the hyperinflation of 1923-24 and then the hammer blow of the Wall Street crash in 1929, it just created fertile ground for demagogues promising radical solutions. Economic certainty was gone, mass unemployment.
So a crisis of liberal democracy.
Absolutely. It seemed ineffective in many countries, and this created a climate where, violent solutions started to look heroic, especially to embittered ex-soldiers and intellectuals.
And now this is where it gets really insightful in the book, I think. The crisis of democracy and how Hitler just masterfully capitalized on it. It wasn't just economic despair, was it? It was a calculated exploitation of these deep societal resentments.
Oh, completely. Beevor shows how the Nazi Party's vote share just skyrocketed from a tiny 2.5% in September 1930 to over 18% in just 2 years. It's staggering.
Wow.
And the conservative right in Germany, they gravely underestimated him. They thought they could use him, control him as some kind of populist puppet.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake. Hitler knew exactly what he wanted. When he became chancellor, January 30th, 1933, he moved incredibly fast to eliminate all potential opposition. He appealed directly to resentment, intolerance, arrogance, and most dangerously, this potent sense of racial superiority. Public institutions, courts, universities, the press, they just kowtowed, as Beevor puts it, to the new regime.
And that point about the Gestapo is chilling.
It is. The secret police arrests were, and I quote, purely in response to denunciations of people by their fellow Germans. Ordinary people turning on each other. And the army. The officer corps, lured by promises of rearmament, they also fell into line, driven by opportunism. Beevor quotes Bismarck, who apparently remarked that moral courage was a rare virtue in Germany, but it deserted a German completely the moment he put on a uniform. And the Nazis, well, they wanted almost everyone in uniform, not least the children. Indoctrination from the start.
So once in power, Hitler doesn't waste any time. He starts overturning that post-World War I order. How did the rest of Europe react to his first aggressive moves? It seems like there was this overwhelming desire to just avoid conflict.
That's very accurate. Hitler easily outmaneuvered the conservatives, using sweeping decrees and mass imprisonment to consolidate power. Then he turned to breaking the Treaty of Versailles. He reintroduced conscription in 1935, openly built up the Navy and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force.
And Britain and France.
No serious protests. Then, March 1936, the Rhineland reoccupation, an overt breach of treaties. Met with huge adoration in Germany, but a supine Anglo-French reaction, just passive.
And for Germans, it worked.
Oh, yes. It restored national pride, it halted unemployment. Beevor notes that for many, the loss of freedom seemed like a small price to pay. At the same time, the persecution of Jews began, step by step, stripping civil rights, public humiliation, forcing emigration, fueled by this incoherent mixture of greed, envy, and imagined resentment. Hitler himself stated in November 1937, "The Jews must get out of Germany. Yes, out of the whole of Europe. That will take some time yet, but will and must happen." Chillingly clear.
And the Lebensraum idea was central.
Absolutely central. Outlined in Mein Kampf, this wasn't just about getting back lost territory. It was about acquiring vast new living space to secure German supremacy. He was aiming for the whole of Central Europe and all of Russia up to the Volga, especially Ukraine, the breadbasket for its resources. And his intervention in the Spanish Civil War, starting summer 36, supporting Franco, that was strategic. A move against the perceived Bolshevik threat, and it also brought him closer to Mussolini.
Okay, so while all this is brewing in Europe, there's this equally significant, but as you said, often overlooked, conflict escalating in the Far East. Let's shift focus to Japan and China. This really puts the world in world war.
It really does. Japan had started its colonial expansion way back, late 19th century, rose as a regional power after defeating Tsarist Russia in 1904-05. Then, after the Wall Street crash, anti-Western feelings surged, leading to increased nationalism. This sets the stage for the Mukden incident in September 1931. The Japanese blew up a section of railway, basically fake an incident to justify seizing Manchuria. They created the puppet state of Manchukuo. Japanese colonists poured in.
And the League of Nations.
Refused sanctions. Left Japan diplomatically isolated, sure, but triumphant. Beevor calls this the start of a fateful progression for Japan. The Japanese military increasingly saw China as, well, a landmass to be subjugated to feed the home islands, similar in a way to the Nazis' designs on the Soviet Union.
So what was happening inside China then? How did that affect their response? Because it wasn't exactly a unified country, was it?
Yeah. Not at all. Deep internal struggle. You had Chiang Kai-shek, who aimed for a Western-style democracy, but Beevor describes him as a generalissimo of warlords. He struggled with internal rivalries, faced huge challenges, modernizing his forces, obsolete weapons, poor communications, lack of training. It was a mess.
And the communists?
Well, Stalin initially urged a united front against Japan, but Mao Zedong, who Stalin apparently saw as a dissident, preferred independent guerrilla warfare, and Chiang tellingly viewed the Japanese as a disease of the skin, but the communists as a disease of the heart. That tells you a lot about his priorities.
So internal fighting was paramount.
Yes. This uneasy situation shattered on July 7th, 1937, with the Marco Polo Bridge incident. Described as a black farce, but it ignited the full-scale Sino-Japanese War. The Japanese military leadership was divided, but the general staff in Tokyo just grossly underestimated Chinese determination. They didn't foresee this drawn-out war of attrition.
They expected another quick win.
Right. Chiang deliberately opened the Battle of Shanghai in August 37. Partly to commit both nationalists and communists to the war of resistance, and partly to draw international attention. It became the largest engagement of the Sino-Japanese War. Nationalist forces suffered absolutely staggering losses. As the Japanese divisions advanced, they torched villages along the way. Nanking was encircled, and the Japanese troops entered with orders to kill all prisoners.
The Nanking Massacre.
The Nanking Massacre, December 1937. The atrocities were horrific. Mass executions, widespread, systematic rape. Civilians desperately tried to shelter in an international safety zone. Beevor talks about the Furia Japonica, the Japanese fury of Nanking, which shocked the world. It revealed this horrific dehumanization within the Imperial Japanese Army. Recruits were apparently insulted and beaten, indoctrinated to believe the Chinese were totally inferior, even below pigs.
Yeah.
Soldiers were forced to torture and bayonet prisoners, a brutalizing process designed to desensitize them.
All right, let's bring it back to Europe then. That political dance was continuing, leading just inexorably towards war. How did the Western powers, especially Britain, react to Hitler's escalating demands? And what were the critical miscalculations? Appeasement looms large here.
It does. Chamberlain's government in Britain was essentially prepared to live with a rearmed and revived Germany. They even saw the Nazis as a potential bulwark against Bolshevism. Beevor describes Chamberlain as being out of his depth, facing Hitler's ruthlessness. He just didn't understand the man he was dealing with.
So the Anschluss, Austria's annexation in March 38.
Seen by many in Britain and France as a small price for world peace, especially since, technically, a majority of Austrians had previously voted for union. A convenient excuse, perhaps.
And then Munich, September 1938.
Munich. Chamberlain and the French Premier Daladier offered Hitler the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, hoping for peace. Beevor points out this actually deprived Hitler of his war in 1938, letting him take Czechoslovakia over without a fight.
And the critical insight here, according to Beevor?
Chamberlain's refusal to consult Stalin? It was a huge error. It decisively influenced Stalin's later decision to make his own pact with Nazi Germany. Chamberlain thought he could handle Hitler alone.
Then came Kristallnacht, November 1938. Surely that opened some eyes.
It should have. The night of broken glass. This pogrom unleashed by Nazi stormtroopers, synagogues burned, Jews attacked and killed. While many ordinary Germans were apparently shocked, Beevor argues the Nazi policy of isolating Jews had succeeded. It persuaded the majority to be indifferent to their fate. They were tempted by looted possessions, by Aryanization taking over Jewish businesses and property. A clever, cynical way to draw more citizens into the circle of crime.
Grim.
By then, Hitler's intentions were now chillingly clear. He actually complained later that he was thwarted from having a war in 1938 because the British and French just accepted all my demands at Munich. He wanted war then.
The stage is well and truly set now for Poland. How did that infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact happen? And what were the immediate triggers for war finally breaking out in Europe? It really did feel like a ticking time bomb by then.
It absolutely was. Stalin was getting nervous. He was alarmed by Britain and France's failure to stand up to Hitler over Czechoslovakia. He suspected, probably correctly, that they wanted to maneuver him into a conflict with Germany, to weaken both.
Let them fight it out.
Exactly. He preferred to see the capitalist states slug it out in their own war of attrition. This paved the way for the Nazi-Soviet Pact, signed August 23, 1939. Talks between Britain, France, and the Soviets had failed, partly because Stalin insisted on transit rights for the Red Army through Poland and Romania, which they refused.
So Hitler saw his chance.
Hitler jumped at it. Ribbentrop, his foreign minister, went to Moscow and proposed a division of the spoils. The result was a secret protocol dividing Central Europe. Stalin got the Baltic states, Bessarabia, eastern Poland. Hitler got the green light to invade western Poland and then deal with France and Britain without facing a two-front war. It was purely cynical realpolitik.
And Hitler's reaction to getting this pact signed, and the way they manufactured the excuse, the casus belli for invading Poland, it sounds almost like something out of a dark satire.
It was chillingly cynical, utterly devoid of morality. On August 21st, when Hitler got the news, Stalin agreed. Beevor writes, he clenched his fists in victory and banged the table, declaring to his entourage, I've got them, I've got them. Just pure elation.
Wow.
Then, to create the pretext for war, they staged the Gleiwitz incident, a completely fake Polish attack on a German radio station near the border. It was black propaganda. SS troopers murdered concentration camp prisoners, dressed them in Polish uniforms, and left their bodies as evidence.
Unbelievable.
The coded phrase to launch this operation was itself terrifyingly symbolic. Grandmother dead.
Jesus.
Hitler was then apparently stunned on September 3rd when Britain actually delivered its ultimatum demanding withdrawal from Poland. Ribbentrop, who'd assured Hitler the British would back down again, was apparently speechless. Goering, head of the Luftwaffe, reportedly said, "If we lose this war, may heaven have mercy on us." They knew the stakes.
And the reaction in London and Berlin.
Quite different. London's reaction was described as universally phlegmatic. Despite air raid sirens, many apparently just put the kettle on for tea, that famous British stoicism.
Right.
Berlin, though, saw little celebration. Most Germans were reportedly dazed and dejected. They'd believed Hitler could win his gains without a major European war. Now they were in one.
So September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed the Polish frontier. The book details the immediate brutal reality of this invasion. It wasn't just conquest. It was annihilation.
Yes. Beevor calls it the wholesale destruction of Poland. German forces, millions of men, hundreds of thousands of vehicles and horses, launched a swift and ruthless blitzkrieg lightning war. Poland was terribly handicapped, their mobilization was delayed, and critically, they had no idea about the secret Soviet pact dividing their country. They were overwhelmed.
And the atrocity started immediately.
Immediately. Polish survivors from early battles, like at Westerplatte, were executed. Jews and prominent Poles were rounded up. Work on the Stutthof concentration camp nearby was sped up. Beevor even mentions the horrific detail about the Danzig Anatomical Medical Institute preparing to process human corpses for leather and soap. The planning was already that ghoulish.
That's sickening.
The Luftwaffe wiped out the Polish Air Force quickly. On the ground, German forces, often inflamed by propaganda and fear of Frank's terrors, civilian fighters committed summary executions and burned down villages. Soldiers' own accounts, cited by Beevor, show this mixture of horror and contempt for Polish villages. They often singled out Jews, describing them with prejudiced language, and maltreated Jews with gusto by beatings, cutting off the beards of elders, humiliating and even raping young women.
And the Einsatzgruppen? The SS killing squads.
They followed the army. Beevor states over 16,000 civilians were executed in just the 5-week campaign, possibly as many as 65,000. These SS formations, like the Einsatzgruppen, machine-gunned mental asylum inmates, targeted intellectuals, priests, leaders, part of a deliberate plan for a clear-out. Beevor argues this Polish campaign served as a horrific trial run for Hitler's later race war, the Rassenkrieg against the Soviet Union, testing the methods of brutality.
And then the Soviets invaded from the east.
Yes, on September 17th, Poland's martyrdom was sealed. Soviet troops crossed the eastern frontier, fulfilling their side of the secret protocol. They actually surprised the Germans, who expected them earlier. The Soviets claimed they were just protecting ethnic Belarusians and Ukrainians, arguing the Polish government had ceased to exist. Pure pretext.
So Poland was just carved up.
Exactly. Divided between the German-occupied general government and areas incorporated directly into the Reich, where ethnic cleansing began immediately. Polish cities renamed, Catholic Church persecuted, schools closed. Poles selected as cheap slaves for labor in Germany.
And Beevor makes it clear this wasn't just German brutality. There was a chilling symmetry in the Soviet actions against the Poles. A double invasion, double oppression.
Precisely. Stalin had this long-standing hatred of Poland, going back to the Soviet-Polish War of 1920, where he'd suffered a defeat. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, immediately began persecuting Poles as enemies of the state. An earlier order, 00485 from 1937, had already implicitly defined Poles this way. Hundreds of thousands had been executed during the Great Terror just for being Polish.
So this was systematic.
Utterly systematic. Mass deportations began swiftly. In February 1940 alone, Beevor cites figures like 139,794 Polish civilians, rounded up, deported to Siberia or Central Asia in freezing temperatures, often below -30°C. Families given minutes to pack, abandoning everything, NKVD soldiers telling them, "You are Polish elite, you are Polish lords and masters, you are enemies of the people." A frequent NKVD phrase was apparently, "Once a Pole, always a kulak being a supposedly wealthy peasant, an enemy class. This marked the beginning of the forced Polish diaspora.
It's horrific. So with Poland crushed, the focus swings back to Western Europe. What actually unfolded during that strange period that became known as the Phony War? It seems like an eerie calm before the real storm hit the West.
It really had a strange, somnambulistic quality, as Beevor describes it. It was as if Poland's fate had been almost forgotten. Life in London and Paris largely returned to normal. The expected mass bombing raids didn't happen. People came out of the shelters.
But the war wasn't entirely phony.
No, not at sea. The naval war intensified. Both sides suffered losses. The sinking of the British battleship HMS Royal Oak in its own base, Scapa Flow, deeply shook Britain's confidence. Then there was the Graf Spee incident. The German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee caused havoc in the South Atlantic, sinking 9 merchant ships. British cruisers eventually cornered it off Uruguay. After a battle, the damaged Graf Spee was scuttled in Montevideo Harbor. Its captain committed suicide later.
A morale boost for Britain.
Definitely a morale boost for Britain. The Germans were shaken by the news, and the Nazis actually tried to ensure it did not spoil their war Christmas. Hitler, famously, didn't want a ship named Germany to be sunk, hence the name change later.
And during this time, Stalin makes another move.
Yes, the Winter War against Finland, November 1939 to March 1940. Stalin invaded after Finland refused territorial demands. He expected a complete walkover.
But it wasn't.
Not at all. The Finns, hugely outnumbered, maybe 150,000, against over 1 million Red Army soldiers, put up incredibly fierce resistance. From the Mannerheim Line, using winter camouflage, skis, guerrilla tactics they called log cutting. And connecting this to the bigger picture, the disastrous performance of the Red Army here, the huge casualties they took compared to the Finns, it seriously alarmed Stalin. It made him very fearful of the German blitzkrieg's effectiveness, seeing his own army struggle so badly. It led to a major shakeup of Soviet military leadership and tactics, a crucial consequence.
And what about the German home front during this phony war?
Well, Hitler himself narrowly escaped an assassination attempt on November 8th, 1939. A bomb planted by a lone carpenter, Georg Elser, went off minutes after Hitler left a beer hall. Nazi propaganda immediately blamed British intelligence, of course.
Right.
Meanwhile, Beevor mentions suspicions were growing among ordinary German families about reports of children and elderly people with disabilities dying of pneumonia. These were actually the first victims of the secret euthanasia program, gassing, carried out by the SS and members of the medical profession. Hitler's order for this was signed in October, but chillingly backdated to the outbreak of war, September 1st.
To link it to wartime necessity.
Exactly. Over 100,000 mentally and physically disabled Germans would be murdered in this program by August 1941. On New Year's Eve 1939, Hitler declared his game for a new order in Europe and stated, "We shall only talk of peace when we have won the war. The Jewish capitalistic world will not survive the 20th century." In a truly bizarre twist, he also sent birthday greetings to Stalin, whose friendship, he said, was cemented by blood. Beevor calls this a pinnacle of shamelessness, given their joint attack on Poland.
And Stalin wasn't finished with Poland either.
Not by a long shot. Even after the costly Winter War, on March 5th, 1940, Stalin approved a plan by Beria, head of the NKVD, to murder thousands of Polish officers and leaders held captive who refused re-education. This led directly to the Katyn Forest Massacre. Over 21,800 victims shot in the back of the head. Another 60,000 Poles and 65,000 Polish Jews were deported around the same time to Kazakhstan and Siberia. The persecution was relentless.
So, as this phony war drags on, how is the French military considered the strongest in Europe on paper actually preparing? Why were they seemingly so unprepared for what hit them in 1940? It feels like a profound failure of foresight.
It really was. Despite its size and reputation, Beevor points out the French army was too slow to react to an attack. It was characterized by a rigidly defensive mentality, obsessed with the Maginot Line, and crucially, it suffered from an almost complete lack of radio communications between units, especially tanks and infantry. German intelligence had actually broken their old-fashioned codes back in 1938.
Wow, so they were blind.
Effectively, yes. And morale wasn't great either. French soldiers endured long periods of inactivity and boredom, leading to bad morale and depression. Beevor quotes one soldier writing home, "One can't spend one's whole time playing cards, drinking and writing home to one's wife. Boredom, filth dominates in the base, not exactly fighting spirit."
And politically.
The country's political and social malaise, Beevor writes, after so many scandals and fallen governments had sapped any hope for unity. There was deep division. You had figures like Colonel Charles de Gaulle, a fervent advocate for modern armored divisions, warning that to be inert is to be beaten. But his calls were dismissed by irritated generals stuck in the past.
So wrapping this initial phase up, what does this all mean for the Western Allies? They'd witnessed Poland's brutal end, but they still seem to be operating under a completely different set of assumptions about the war.
It highlights a really tragic disconnect, doesn't it? Poland's fate was sealed, yet it became, as Beevor notes, one of the very few countries in the Nazi Empire where collaboration with the conqueror was virtually unknown. They maintained a government in exile, a huge underground army, fierce resistance.
But France?
French leaders, and many in Britain too, simply failed to grasp that this war would not be like earlier conflicts. They didn't understand the Nazis' true aims. The Nazis intended to reorder Europe in their own brutal image, not just, seek reparations or take back a province like Alsace-Lorraine. It was total ideological transformation through violence.
And across the Atlantic.
President Roosevelt, Beevor suggests, saw things more clearly. He saw supporting Britain and France as the only hope for democracy. He pushed through the cash and carry bill in November '39, allowing them to buy U.S. arms, a sign of foresight compared to the complacency in Paris and, to some extent, London.
So, reflecting on all this, what does it really mean for you, the listener, as you consider these beginnings of World War II through Beevor's lens?
I think what emerges so powerfully from this initial phase, as Beevor portrays it, is that this wasn't one single event. It was this convergence of multiple conflicts, each with its own deep roots in history, in economic despair, in this burning ideological fervor. And it shows how the human cost was just staggering right from the very start, often affecting ordinary people like Yang Yongzhang, forced into these unimaginable circumstances, and how the seeds of even greater atrocities like the Holocaust and the war in the East were being sown very early on.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that truly understanding history means looking beyond just the headlines, beyond single dates. You have to grasp the messy, complex, often overlooked connections that shape the world we live in.
Absolutely. And perhaps it leaves you, the listener, with a question to ponder. How much of the devastation, the sheer scale of human suffering that Beevor describes could possibly have been averted if key leaders, key nations had truly understood the depth of their adversaries' ambitions, the ruthlessness, the interconnectedness of these global events, instead of making assumptions based on past wars or, frankly, narrow self-interest? It's a question that still feels relevant today, doesn't it?